name's Bryce. I'm just going to talk about land use and zoning. Typically, zoning that provides for a single use on any given area, piece of land. My proposition is that we should get rid of single-use zoning because the benefits that it provides us don't outweigh the expense to the greater good we should be having. Well, back on zoning itself, it's just what regulates what use can be on land, residential, commercial, industrial, etc. Originally, it was in the 1926, the Supreme Court case with Euclid v. Ambler Realty that provided the basis for the zoning that we know today. They determined that it was constitutional to eliminate certain uses in certain areas to provide for the health and safety of the community. Like you wouldn't want industrial right next to where you live. The reason that this is important to look at this and figure out is because on one study it says 97% of incorporated communities regulate their land use through zoning like this. The three points that I'm going to make are, as I said, the detrimental aspects of this type of zoning don't outweigh the benefits, and those are through social impacts, economic impacts, and environmental impacts. The first one is social impacts. It said when you have separate uses and you don't allow things with each other, it often puts your residential and like where you work, where you shop, you can't walk to anything. You're having to commute long distances or even short distances. That causes a disconnect in the community, and having people not be able to be near each other, having them have to commute such long distances, provides a disconnect just between families. You don't see people often. Also, because you can't walk to anything, the population is not as healthy because people aren't getting the exercise. They're just in their cars all the time. The other social aspect is, in terms of residential, zoning, is most often separated between multifamily, single family, and the like, and that can cause segregation in the population because lower income people are more likely to live in multifamily or apartment housing, and that's not allowed with single family. One example of this, the second one is economic. The problems you have with this type economically is that it limits the uses of what you can have certain places, so businesses can't exist in certain areas. And by constantly having to separate things, you're building further out, and that raises infrastructure costs that we all have to end up paying for, more roads and such. Final point is about the environmental impacts that it has. Most obvious is, having to have separate uses in every place. That leads to sprawl. That's, just when you have like neighborhoods that are just tract homes built out wherever, or your retail centers that are just acres of parking and buildings set in the back. And having to constantly build that way takes more and more land, and you keep pushing out from your city into more environmentally protected areas. The last thing, also environmental, is that, as I said before, with more commuting, because you're not living near anything you need to get. Some numbers. There's in Jacksonville, there's a study done, and it showed that 92% of the people have to drive to their work because they don't live close enough. And that was the largest, I guess the highest percentage amongst the 25 largest cities in the country. And because of that, because of the driving, you're adding to more pollution and just more health impacts for people. I think because of those three types of problems, they are not there's too many problems there to outweigh the threat of, living next to a business or whatnot, the reasons that they separated the uses in the first place. And I said, I don't think those outweigh any good that you get from it, so I think we need to change from single-use zoning.
All right, well, the proposition as you start off is a policy claim, not a claim of fact. The second part of it is kind of a justification, and it is potentially a claim of fact, so it should be the focus of your argument. You say you're going to lay out the secondary claims for us, but basically you just start with the first point and you start presenting information at that point. I think I have a little bit of a problem because in the way most of your secondary claims are presented, they don't really sound like they are inferences, and when they do sound like they're inferences, they sometimes sound like they're contradicting each other. At one point it sounds like you're saying, well, it's a good thing that we have separation of uses, and then later on it sounds like you're saying, well, by doing that we create all these problems for ourselves. All of the problems that you're talking about, the only one that I heard any evidence on was that people actually have to drive their cars to get to work, and I'm not sure that there's any surprise about that, so I'm not sure why that's the one piece of evidence that you presented in the argument. But all the harm of having to drive to work is largely asserted. The idea that you wouldn't have to have roads if people didn't have to drive to work, well, that would be true if they all stayed on their own piece of property too, but that doesn't seem like that's going to work, and you have to get from one city to another. So the idea that you wouldn't have to spend this money if people weren't driving back and forth to work, I think that's largely an assumption. And then the harms of having to drive someplace or do any of those kinds of things are asserted. I don't get any quantification of how much impact there is in terms of pollution or global warming or any of those other things that are supposedly bad about having to travel. The stuff that you had early on about how there's a disconnect with the family or they're not, the communities are not connected, that's all asserted. Like I said, I think that if you wanted to talk about benefits of this as background, that's fine. Give us what the benefits were and then tell us what your claim is. It seems like you've got this explanation of what the benefits were as part of your argument, and that's why things seem a little bit contradictory. The biggest problem, though, is the lack of citation of evidence. I got a lot of secondary claims, like I said, some of which seem to be contradictory to one another, but I'm not getting much data to support any of those inferences. Like I said, I heard maybe two particular references. One was the 92%. I think there was another study that you made a reference to in the speech as well. So it's, you need to get more data into the speech, and you need to clarify what the inference is so that it's easier for us to figure out where there is clash on these issues. I don't think there's much clash that zoning is necessary to, let's say, keep a slaughterhouse away from a neighborhood, or we don't want a factory next door to a school. That makes perfect sense. But how is what you're talking about going to be different? What's different about it? How does it fix a problem? Getting rid of the single use zoning code that you're talking about, what would that result in? That at least would be a claim of future fact, and then we'd be able to see something that was a little bit more tangible and easier to respond to. All right, thank you.